All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to continue on with our notes here. This is for 1.3, and we are going to be talking about adding integers. Now, you could start by writing this title down, but when you are done, I would suggest that you could just watch this next section first. Oops, watch. And then you can copy the notes down later when I tell you when, because I want to start off with a little analogy. And hopefully this analogy can help clarify about what adding integers are like. So let's say you have a guy in Green Army, and you have another guy, a soldier from a Red Army, and they're about to fight each other. Now the thing is, they're both very equally matched. So what will happen is whenever they fight each other, they will eliminate each other at the same time. So let's say they fire their weapons and green's weapon hits red and red's weapon hits green as well. So what just happened is they both just disappeared or they died. Now, let's say we have a different kind of scenario here. So we have two people from the Green Army and we have one person from the Red Army. All right, now they're also going to fight. So each of them are going to fire off their weapons. And so then one of the weapons go from the Green Army soldiers, and so does another bullet right there. But then red also fires a bullet to one of the guys. And you could see in this case, one bullet is going to hit the green, and one bullet from the green is going to hit the red. But you have this one person who survives this encounter. So you can imagine that if we have something like one person in the Green Army and two people in the Red Army, or let's make it three, and let's say they do the same thing, they fight, then what happens is one bullet from the red and the green hit each other, and now you get these two people who are left and who survive. So with this, we could kind of have this image that depending on which army is bigger, that army is going to win, right? Because each person that kills a soldier is also going to die by that soldier as well. But if you have extra people, well, they're not going to get hit at all. Now, let's take a look at one more scenario before we fully move on here. And so in this scenario, let's say you have a guy from the Green Army, or let's say you have two guys from the Green Army. And then on the other side, you find out that there's another guy from the Green Army. What do you think is going to happen to them? Are they going to fight? No, they're not going to fight. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to join armies. So now, instead of just having two green people and one green person, you're going to have a total of 3 green people. The same applies to the red. If this lone soldier goes and he runs into a group of 3 red soldiers, then what are they going to do? They're going to combine forces and they are going to be a group of 4. All right, so the reason why we look into this analogy here is because this is what I would like to call the battlefield of addition. So whenever you are adding integers, you have to remember this battlefield story, because what you get are you have armies, like people from one side, maybe the green side, which represent the positive side, and then you have people from the red side, and they represent the negative side. Now, how does this analogy actually work in this case? Well, let's go back to when they fight each other, right? So let's say you have one positive soldier right here, and that soldier is facing one negative soldier. We don't need the banner for that. Okay. And let's say they continue to fight. Now, you have 0 soldiers because they managed to defeat each other. But now, if you have, let's say, 2 soldiers from the positive side and 1 soldier from the negative side, then, like we saw earlier, the bullets would cancel each soldier out, and I'm left with 1 soldier on the positive side. So now, how this looks like in math is, let's say, in this example, you had +2. and you want it to add, right? You want to combine it with a -1. Well, take a look at what happens, right? The two soldiers here, one red and one green, both die. So the -1 soldier is gone, and the +2 soldiers ends up becoming +1. And so your answer here is +1 at the end. This also makes sense where if you have more of the negative soldiers, so let's say you have 3 of the negative soldiers, and then you have 1 of the green soldiers, the positive soldiers, then again, when they fight, then you have 1 soldier from each team go away, and you are left with 2 negative soldiers. So the way we could look at this is if you have +1 and you have -3, then if you add them together or you make them fight, then you know that the 1 is going to be gone there, and the negative is going to end up with only 2 soldiers left. There also is this idea, though, the reason why this analogy works pretty well is because maybe you might wonder, well, what happens if I add 2 negative numbers? Well, if you add 2 negative numbers, so let's say -2 and -3, remember, what do these soldiers do? Do they fight? No, they do not. And so instead they join forces. So instead of just having -2 and -3 soldiers, when you add them together, you are going to end up with -5 soldiers. So they add up together. All right. So when it comes to this analogy now, I hope that that could shed some light on what integers are like. And now at this point, we could write a set of notes to better clarify this concept. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the rules that we should do whenever we are dealing with integers. All right, so integers are positive and or negative numbers. So let's just clarify that. So let's define it. Integers All right, and now we're going to try to add them. So whenever you add integers, you have to look at a few things first, okay? So the first thing that you're going to look at is, are the symbols the same? Or are the, yeah, let's go with symbols. So when we say symbols, we mean plus or minus. All right, so when we are adding two numbers and we have one number that is a positive and another number that is a positive, then what is your answer going to be, or what are you going to do? Well, in this case, you're going to, if yes, so let's say that they are the same, then you're going to add the numbers. Keep the symbol. Okay, so let's do one quick little example here. So example, if we have a number like +2 plus 7, then we are going to get +9. Now with positives, we don't usually write them the positive sign down, but we know that all numbers, if there are no symbols, then they are positive. Now let's look at another example here. Let's say we have -2 plus -7. What does that equal? Well, in this case, we say add the numbers. So I have 2, I have 7, I add them together. Now I have 9, and keep the symbol. So it's -9. Now, sometimes if a number starts off as a negative number, you don't always have to have the parentheses. But if you want to play it safe, we could always just write the parentheses in front of any negative number. That should help you better separate it than having a minus sign. All right, so the question though is, what happens when they are not the same? So this is where it feels like it gets a little bit trickier, but it actually is pretty straightforward. So take the bigger number, then subtract smaller number. Then you have one more step. And keep the sign of the bigger number. So if you think about the analogy earlier there with the battlefield of additions, think of it like the army, right? If the positive army is the bigger one, well, they're going to win. And so the flag of the positive army is the one that's going to be kept. Whereas if the negative army is the bigger one, then the negative team is going to win. And so the negative flag is going to be kept. So let's take a look at what this would look like here. We're going to do two examples. So in this case, we're going to start with, let's say, the number 27. And we're going to add, and we're going to say, let's say, negative 7. So what would this equal? Well, so you could see that they're both opposite sides. So it is the battlefield of additions. That means you have to fight it out. We see that, okay, so take the bigger number, which is 27, minus a smaller number. So 7. 27 minus 7 is 20. And now I keep the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number, or the winner, is the positive sign. So then I am left with 20. Another example, though, is what if the opposite is true in terms of the team? So let's say we have 9 on one side and then plus, and let's say we have negative 19. Then what's going to happen? Well, take the bigger number, 19, minus the smaller number, 9. That's left. You're left with 10. But then you take the sign of the winning number. And sometimes if it kind of helps, what you can do is you can use different colors. That's something that I would actually recommend if you do find this a little bit difficult. That way you remember the two opposite teams, right? So in this case, for example, I know that there's for positive numbers, let's say use the color green. And so 27, bigger army, negative 7, smaller army. So then I'm left with 20 soldiers. But then in the other case, I have negative 19, which is the bigger army. And then I have positive 9, which is the smaller army. So I'm left with 10 of the negative army people. And this is the notes that you have. Now, when you work on the practice questions or the try questions, you will see that in the book, they do use other methods as well. They use the counter method, and they use a couple of, they use the number line method. You could take a look at those and see if any of them stick to you or are interesting to you. They're pretty clear with how they explain it, so you could go ahead and check it out there. And try to do some of them as you work through the try questions. The goal is to figure out which method works best for you, and so that when it does come to you having to answer questions like this, then you'll know what method works well. All right.